Can you mute your camera, please?
Mute and camera on. Okay.
Can you turn them off, please, Councillor? Thank you, IT. Right, good evening and welcome to Rugby Borough Council's Planning Committee meeting today. My name is Councillor Catherine Lawrence and I'm the committee chairman. This meeting is being streamed to the public and is being attended by members of the committee through Microsoft Teams. With me this evening, I have the support of the following officers. Richard Holt, Head of Planning and Enforcement. Are you there, Richard?
I am.
Sarah Chapman, our Legal Advisor.
I'm present.
Claire Wallachek, our Democratic Services Officer.
Present, Chair.
And Chris Kingham and Nathan Loud, Planning Officers.
Present.
Before we begin working through the agenda, I'll go through some rules on procedure. As set out in the introduction, this meeting is being web streamed to the public, and this is being monitored by IT services. If at any point there are any streaming issues, then I will be informed and the meeting will be adjourned until such time that the technological issues can be resolved. If during the course of the meeting any member of the committee is having connection issues, then there will be a short adjournment of up to 5 minutes to determine whether the connection issues can be resolved. If following the adjournment the connection issues cannot be resolved, then providing the meeting remains quorate, it will continue. It will be deemed that the member with connection issues has left the meeting and will no longer be able to participate. If it is me who has connection issues, then the Vice Chair will assume the chairmanship of the meeting. For officers, please switch off your microphones and cameras and I'll call you to speak at the appropriate times. And for committee members, your microphones and cameras should be switched off unless you are speaking. If you wish to ask a question on the officer's report or during debate, please use the raised hand function and wait for me to ask you to speak. Voting during virtual meetings will use the raised hand function, and I will ask our legal advisor and our Democratic Services Officer to verify the votes. Are there any questions before we move into the formal agenda? Thank you. I'll now ask our Democratic Services Officer to confirm the attendees at the meeting. Your name will be called out and can you please confirm your attendance?
Thank you, Chair. So just moving through the names alphabetically of members of the committee and then the substitutes for this evening. So Councillor Mrs Brown.
I'm here.
Councillor Kieran Brown.
Present.
Councillor Butlin.
Councillor Butlin's been delayed and he'll be 20 minutes late.
Not sure he can vote. Councillor Mrs Garcia.
Present.
Councillor Gillias.
Present.
Councillor Miss Lawrence.
Thank you. And Councillor Garcia, can you turn your camera off, please?
Councillor Picker.
Present.
Councillor Roodhouse.
Present.
Councillor Srivastava.
I'm here.
And substitutes for this evening, Councillors Cranham.
Present.
Councillor Keeling.
Present.
And Councillor Mrs New.
Present.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. All right. So we move on to agenda item 1, which is to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of March 2020. If it's your wish to confirm those minutes as an accurate record of the meeting, will you please raise your hand now? Okay. Claire, could you confirm that we have got the vote for that, please?
I haven't got a raised hand from Councillor Cranham. Oh, there we go. Yes, that's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, you may lower your hands, everybody. Right, agenda item 2 is to receive apologies for absence from the meeting. Can we have apologies, please, Claire?
Yes, Chair. So 3 apologies this evening from councillors Eccleston, Sanderson and Byrne, and their substitutes respectively are councillors Keeling, Mrs New and Cranham.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 3 are declarations of interest, and to receive declarations of interest under A, non-pecuniary interest as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for Councillors. Do we have any declarations? Thank you. Under B, pecuniary interest as divided by the Council's Code of Conduct for Councillors. Do we have any declarations? Thank you. And under C, notice under section 106 Local Government Finance Act 1992, non-payment of council tax. Any declarations? Okay, there are none. Thank you. Okay, we move on to agenda item 4, which are applications for consideration. And we have 2 applications this evening. And the first application is R19/0804 regarding the former cattle market, Craven Road, Rugby, and Chris Kingham is the officer to present.
Thank you, Chair. So we have before us a planning application on the former cattle market site, which is located on Craven Road in Rugby. This is a full planning application for the erection of 360 dwellings over 4 apartment blocks. The application site can be seen on the screen before you now and is outlined in red. You can see here on the screen an aerial view, satellite view of the site. Again, the outline of the site is seen in red. You can see it there within the context of the surrounding existing development. Notable landmarks include the presence of Rugby train station, and then the council offices are located down here, and the town centre in this location here. Going in a bit closer, the application site that we're looking at is this area of undeveloped land, which you can see has been outlined by my cursor. And you can see there some of the existing development that's already been built on the former cattle market site, and also the more established development in the surrounding area. Just going to show you some photographs of the site now, and you can see here just the existing state of the site is now just derelict. All existing buildings that are on the site have been removed, and you're left just with areas of hard standing and just natural planting which has grown up in its place. In terms of the development that's been already carried out on the former cattle market site, you can see here we have a Travelodge building and Tesco Express to the ground floor. You have a health centre, you have a care home, and you have affordable housing. Within the wider area, you have access to Rugby Station, just about 100 metres from the site. You have the Stagecoach ticket office, an industrial unit. You have Meissen House, which at its highest point is 7 stories. You have residential apartments in this 3-storey block, and you have the existing 2-storey affordable housing. So in terms of understanding the nature of the proposal, it's firstly necessary to have regard to the history of this scheme and how it's come into existence. And a key part of understanding that is looking at the context of this site. And in particular, you have a number of constraints that are formed by things like existing buildings in the area and the historic street pattern. So as you can see on the screen in the bottom left-hand corner, the red line here shows the extent of the former cattle market site. And you can see there that there are a number of existing buildings that have been developed on there. And we've just seen some of the pictures of those as well. So those existing buildings invariably have things like windows that front onto the application site and therefore form a key constraint that limits what can now take place on the area that's derelict. Also of interest is the historic street pattern in the area. So you can see here it's actually very clear that there are clear links going across the site that need to be protected and maintained, and that's had a further influence on what can take place on this site. Another key thing to consider is that of Gavel Drive, which goes through the eastern perimeter of the site, and that has visibility displays that need to be protected, and that also limits what can take place on the site and also limits the site access arrangements. Another critical thing to consider is that of existing drainage pipes that go across the site with a need for easements to those. So you can see here on the screen there are a number of existing easements. So you can see that in the green and blue areas, and that limits where you can put buildings because you can't actually build over those with things like apartment blocks. So that has to all remain free of development. So what we end up with is when we look at all of those key constraints, you end up with 4 development blocks, and that's shown by the blue rectangles that you can see on the screen before you now. And they're the areas where you can actually get some development on the site. The areas outside of that are really limited because, as you can see, you've got your visibility displays here, you've got your sewer easements running through the site, and you've also got those historic street links that you need to maintain going across the site too. So that means that we've ended up with a situation where there's 4 apartment blocks that are proposed, as you can see on the screen before you. And this plan is actually very helpful because it shows you how that achieves development on the site whilst respecting these underground sewer easements and also visibility displays and the historic links. Just so you can see it without all of the constraints mapped on, this is the scheme that's proposed. And you've got 4 key blocks that are in an L shape. And that provides a strong frontage, and it provides a scale that's in keeping with that of existing buildings. So you've got here 2 4-storey blocks, that's blocks A and B. Block D is a 5-storey block, and block C is a 6-storey block, and that reflects the increase in height from the southern area of the site to the northern area where heights increase. So for example, you'll recall the picture of Myson House, which was up to 6 stories to the highest point as well. The scheme also critically achieves active elevations onto all of the public areas that people would be walking past. It also includes pedestrian links that tie in with existing development. So, for example, it's got a pedestrian link past the Wellbeing and Health Centre. It's got a link that goes through out onto Railway Terrace, and that links into the existing pedestrian streets that have already been created on the site that in turn tie into those historic roads. The layout we feel is permeable throughout, and critically as well, they've put the parking behind the buildings, so that just reduces the appearance of parked cars in that public view. The proposals include electric vehicle charging points, and there are cycle parking stores around the buildings that provide 1 space for each apartment. Visitor cycle parking is also proposed to the front of the buildings. And you'll see that the existing trees along Craven Road are retained and protected by this design. That's then supplemented by further new planting around the scheme. That includes both soft landscaping and hard landscaping. Also of benefit is the creation of a new public park. So that's this pocket park located here, and that would incorporate a green gym. There are also bin stores that would be provided for residents, and of interest as well is in Block B, there would be a reception area, a communal social space, and a communal gym. In terms of what the arrangement of the apartments would look like, you've got an example here from Building B, and you can see that they will provide 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. So you can see they've got open plan living areas with a lounge, kitchen and dining area. And then you've got storage areas to the bedrooms. And you can also see that each bedroom has its own bathroom as well. In terms of the elevations, you can see an example of a 4-storey apartment block here. And then an example of the 6-storey apartment block. And then just to bring that to life, you've got some illustrative views that I'll now run through. So you can see you've got your 4-storey blocks here, a 5-storey block and a 6-storey block. What that looks like on the street level is visible now on the screen. So you can see here we've got the apartment blocks that are proposed and then existing affordable dwellings located here. You can see here a view from Railway Terrace, and that's the 6-storey block. And you can also see the Pocket Park located here as well. And then you've got a view from Craven Road. So this is the existing care home on Craven Road, and this is the apartment block that is proposed. And then just a alternative view of that same apartment block. So you've got the Gavel Drive entrance here and Craven Road running across here. You can see that it achieves very modern and contemporary style of development. There's subtle elevation setbacks. So you'll see here the building is broken up. That just helps to reduce the massing of the building. And there's also subtle changes to the height of the building. So it does drop slightly when you go on the different wings of the development. The elevation as well is broken up through the use of horizontal banded brickwork, which forms a textured brick plinth to the ground floor. You can see that on the screen here. And to the floors above, you've just got plain brickwork. And then to the final floor, you have a recessed coping detail with cap above the buildings. You'll also see here some of the deep reveal depths to the windows and the doors. And you'll see that they're using 2 different colour bricks just to help further break up the massing and bulk of the buildings. So in terms of the key issues of the development, it's firstly necessary to have regard to the settlement hierarchy outlined in our local plan. And in that sense, the site is located in Rugby Town, which is the most sequentially preferable and sustainable location for development. In terms of the use, this is a site that's now been derelict for 12 years. It's been stalled, and this represents a significant new opportunity to bring this site back into active use. It's a brownfield, previously developed site within the urban area, and therefore the residential use of this is considered to be acceptable. In regard to need, it's clear that there is a need for the regeneration of the immediate area and also of the town centre. And this development opportunity would obviously help to address that need. In terms of housing need, it would make a significant contribution to maintaining a 5-year housing land supply and boosting supply of new homes in the borough. In turn, that will reduce pressure on greenfield sites on the edge of town. In terms of the density, it is 191 dwellings per hectare, so that's a very high density. And it's clear that it therefore makes a very effective and efficient use of this land. And that is considered to be acceptable given the sustainable location of the site. In terms of tenure, the proposal is for private rented sector housing. All apartments would be rented, and it's considered that this will help to meet a very specific need of local people in Rugby. It will be managed very well because it's a long-term investment, and their emphasis is on achieving high quality design and place, and also ensuring that it's looked after well following occupation. In terms of the mix of housing, it's comprised of 56% one-bedroom properties and 44% two-bedroom properties. It's going to be in a sustainable and accessible location, so that housing mix is considered to be appropriate. The shape of the site and also the size and the constraints also steer towards a housing mix as has been proposed. Moving on to affordable housing, members will know that the target in the local plan is for 20% affordable housing on brownfield sites such as this. That would require 72 units for the 360 dwellings proposed. But the applicant is actually proposing no affordable housing on this site. So the reason for this is actually that it needs to be viewed as part of the original wider development site. So you can see here the original outline application on the site, which members will have seen on the agenda under the relevant history section. The outline application covered all of this area of the site. You can see there, that's also shown currently on the aerial view. So you can see that there's been development on parts of that site. So we'll have seen that in the pictures that we went through earlier. And that shows that you have development on parts of the site, but not on this part of the site, which is stalled. So we've sought legal advice as to whether we can take affordable housing provision into account that's already been provided on the wider site. And in that regard, there are three key areas that we need to consider, and that's ownership, site, and development. In relation to ownership, the wider cattle market site has all been under one ownership and just been sold off as it's been developed. In terms of the site, you've just seen that the outline application had a red line around the area of this current application site and also land that has already been developed. And indeed, it has been developed in phases with changes made as it's been developed over this long period of time. That's a period of over 12 years. And in terms of the development, it remains in residential use. So basically, before on the site, under the outline permission, it was granted that residential uses would be appropriate and acceptable on this application site. And obviously that's carried through with this current proposal. It's therefore deemed that this application site can be considered as part of the wider site, and that allows us to take into account existing affordable housing provision that's already been made when determining what affordable housing requirements are necessary for this scheme. So in that regard, you have 171 existing dwellings on the site, and 360 dwellings are now proposed. That gives us a total of 451 dwellings. 90 of those 451 dwellings would therefore need to be affordable in order to meet the 20% affordable housing target. There are 91 existing affordable dwellings on the site already, and therefore that's one more than the 90 that would be required to meet the affordable housing target. So therefore we feel that when you take into account the cattle market site as a whole, it does meet the local plan 20% affordable housing requirement. Another issue to consider is the impact on light, aspect and privacy. And in that regard, this is a very constrained site. So you'll have seen all of the existing buildings around the site have windows and things like gardens that influence where development can come forward on this remaining parcel of land. And what this scheme has done is it's sensitively looked at those windows and tried to achieve separation distances which would not harm light, aspect and privacy. The plan there shows some of those separation distances that have been achieved, but there is one exception to this, and that's at Drover's house. So you can see here, this is Drover's house, and it has a number of windows to the rear elevation of that property that face towards the application site. So the windows that we're concerned with are these 6 windows here. And you can see that with the proposed building in purple here, and you've got the existing 6 windows that we're looking at here. And on the site plan, you've got, this is Drover's house. The yellow lines show the location of the windows that we're looking at, and you can see the relationship there with block A. So that distance between the existing windows in Drover's house and block A is 6.8 meters. You can see also that the window here does have a view that goes just straight past the side of block A, but it would infringe a 45-degree line from the center point of that window. So we've factored into account that there are some views past the building to the northeast when looking out of those windows. So that's this view here. But nonetheless, it's still considered that there will be an impact on light and aspect to those windows and the rooms associated with them. But we've had regard to the very constrained nature of the site and the need to achieve a development that's viable. And in that respect, we feel that the harm that's caused by the building here would be acceptable on balance. And we'll come back to that in the conclusion. In terms of vehicle parking provision, it's necessary to have regard to our local plan policy, that's policy D2. That sets out that you must incorporate adequate and satisfactory parking into new development. Now it says that that should be based on standards in the local plan, and there is an appendix to the local plan which includes a guide as to what parking standards should be achieved. But it does make clear in that guide that it is guidance only, and it should be used to inform negotiations. It is not minimum standards, and it is not definitive as to what must be provided. I've picked out a couple of key notes for residential apartments where it stipulates that it is considered inappropriate to apply a standard to this form of development. Therefore, applications will be considered on their own merits and according to the suitability of the location of this type of use. It further sets out that the standards do not preclude zero or minimal parking close to major transport interchanges. So you will recall, obviously, that in this instance, the site is located 100 metres away from such a transport interchange, being Rugby Railway Station. The site is also in a high access zone, and so the guidance suggests that you should achieve 0.75 spaces for each apartment. That would equate to 270 spaces for the 360 dwellings proposed. So in terms of actual provision, they are looking at providing 144 spaces. That is 126 spaces less than the guidance suggests. So there has to be justification for allowing that lower number. And in that regard, we have arguably the most sustainable site in the borough before us. As I just mentioned, it's 100 metres from the train station. It's also 300 metres to the edge of the town centre, where there's a variety of shops, services and facilities that residents can access. There are bus stops on the road surrounding the application site and also within the town centre as well. There are employment sites close by, so you've got one just over the road here, and you've also got retail development, and obviously that provided within the town centre. And the site is located on a national cycle route, and they would provide one covered and secure cycle parking space per apartment. There would also be visitor cycle stands. So you can see here there's a catchment map plan. The site is located in red, and you can see the vast area of the site that can be accessed within a 2 kilometre walking catchment from the development. And if you take into account cycling, where you can obviously get further on a bike, the 5 kilometre cycling catchment area is shown here, and that covers most of the Rugby urban area. So this all means that occupants are less likely to have cars, and it also reflects the modal split of car usage in Ben Ward, where the site is located. And in any event, we've also had regard to the fact that if further parking was required by residents, there are a number of public car parks within the vicinity of the site. So you've obviously got the railway station parking, which you can get annual passes for, just across the road. You've also got parking on Mill Road, and of course there's many parking spaces available within Rugby town centre. So aside from that, we've had regard to whether there are alternative options which would mean that we could achieve higher levels of parking. And in that respect, we have had regard to previous permissions which tried to achieve one parking space per dwelling. But as members will be aware, those previous permissions have not been implemented. And part of the reason for that is that those schemes included things like underground parking, which have been explored for this application, but have been found to be unviable. We've also looked at things like undercroft parking, but that would reduce the amount of apartments provided and therefore make the scheme unviable. So having regard to site constraints as well, there really is just no further room to achieve extra spaces. So in conclusion on that matter, we believe that the parking provision is acceptable for this location, given the constraints and viability of the site. The County Highway Department have accepted this. However, we have imposed condition 24 and 25, which require details of a car park management plan to ensure that the operation of the on-site parking is carried out in a way that's suitable, appropriate and managed. And the off-site parking monitoring plan will require the applicant to undertake a analysis of on-street parking before the development is occupied and then after the scheme is occupied. And if it's found that there's been a significant increase in on-street parking post-occupation, a financial contribution will be secured to amend the traffic regulation order that's already in place to extend the hours and days that would operate. All of this would ensure that it would not reduce parking for existing residents who rely on on-street parking in this locality. Moving on to cycle parking, the scheme provides a minimum of one secure and covered space per dwelling. That's 360 spaces in total, and they would be provided in the stores, of which an example is visible on the screen before you. In terms of cycle routes, the site is located on 2 national cycle routes. So here we have the site, and you can see here the 2 national cycle routes located, shown by the blue and orange lines. So we've asked County Highways whether it would be appropriate to seek a financial contribution for cycle route improvements, either along those existing routes or trying to create a new route, for example, from the station to the town centre. They have advised that that wouldn't be appropriate or necessary in this instance. They particularly highlight that in the roads surrounding the site, they are subject to a 20-mile-per-hour zone, and that is very suitable for on-carriageway cycling for the majority of people. There's also difficulties in providing dedicated cycle infrastructure on residential streets around this area. So you've got a picture here of Bath Street, and you can see it's very narrow and there's lots of on-street parking. So that really restricts the ability to create things like cycle lanes, for instance. There's also no existing or proposed cycling schemes that are currently proposed for which contributions could be sought for. But the county have said they are currently undertaking a review of the local transport plan. That will therefore address any issues that are in the locality. So, for instance, if it was found that cycling and walking was not being considered as a suitable or viable option by residents, then that transport plan could identify strategies and schemes to try and address that. That would come forward at a future point in time and hopefully address any concerns that members may have around that issue. Moving on to air quality, members will note that there is an air quality management area in place for the whole of Rugby urban area. So each year the council undertakes monitoring which looks at whether things like nitrogen dioxide levels are being exceeded. And the 2019 report said that there were only 2 instances in the whole of the borough where there was an exceedance of annual mean objective levels for nitrogen dioxide. One of these is outside of the air quality management area in Shilton, and one of these is located at Dunchurch Crossroads, which you can see where my cursor is there, which is obviously a significant distance away from the site located here. The report also identifies that there has been monitoring within the area surrounding the site at Murray Road, Wood Street and Railway Terrace. The report notes that there is no exceedance of annual mean objectives for nitrogen dioxide at these locations. Now, in terms of the impact of this development on air quality, it's natural that there will be vehicular movements to and from the apartments, and therefore the impact of that on air quality has been assessed. A critical part of that has been engaging with the County Highways Department, who have agreed modelling and trip distribution from the site. They've identified that there would be 81 two-way vehicle trips during the morning peak and 90 two-way vehicle trips in the evening peak. That equates to 1 arrival trip on each of the principal routes every 3 to 4 minutes, and 1 departure trip every 4.5 to 6 minutes during the higher PM peak. County Highways have suggested that that would not be significant, and it would not give rise to a severe impact on roads and junctions above the existing situation. They're not able to seek contributions to address the existing issues of of congestion in the area, and therefore there's no scheme that they can currently ask the developer to make financial contributions to address that. The air quality assessment consequently concludes that there would not be any new exceedances of the relevant air quality objectives arising from this development. The impact on air quality would therefore be negligible. Nonetheless, in mitigation, the applicant is proposing to provide a number of solutions and measures to try and reduce the impact on air quality. So part of that will be the provision of electric vehicle charging points, but also as well, as we've just looked at, the lower parking provision for this site actually helps because it achieves less vehicular movements going to and from the development. Added to that, this is a very sustainable location where there are options of walking, cycling, using the bus and the train. And all of that helps to reduce the reliance on private vehicles that will lead to higher emissions. We've got a number of conditions that are on screen there for you that also help to lower that impact on air quality. And the most significant of that is the final one, condition 19, that stipulates that the development must meet air quality neutral standards. So the applicant will need to submit to us details that show how they will achieve that. In terms of noise, there is obviously a lot of noise from traffic, the train line and businesses in this area. And the site layout has therefore been designed to reduce the proximity to those noise sources. And an assessment has been submitted which shows that that can be mitigated through the use of acoustic glazing and ventilation. But the levels in the area are so high that residents would need to keep their windows closed to ensure that their amenity is not affected. So therefore the temperature inside the building needs to be controlled to reduce desire and the need to open windows to cool rooms. So they need to have measures to tackle overheating, for example, ventilation systems or air conditioning. And therefore we have suggested imposing condition 12, which requires the submission of an overheating assessment and noise mitigation measures. Now, specifically relevant perhaps to today, where it's very warm, the overheating assessment will need to take account of things like high temperatures in the summer that we're currently experiencing, and also make allowances for climate change. So that will ensure that it future-proofs the development and ensures that residents would be able to stay cool without needing to open windows and exposing themselves to higher levels of noise. We feel that all of these measures would mean that levels within the accommodation would be acceptable and reduced to a level where the potential for complaints would not materialise. In terms of biodiversity, a biodiversity impact assessment has been submitted with the proposal. This sets out that there would be a net loss of biodiversity and that a biodiversity offsetting scheme is therefore required. This would be secured in a legal agreement and it would lead to a financial contribution for enhancements that could be used in the vicinity of the development at a location to be agreed. And the county ecology department can be asked to look at options in Ben Ward in the first instance. One of the interesting and unique things about this development is the emphasis on sustainable living. And in the first instance, it's achieving that through being sustainable by design. As we've already touched on, it's within the urban area. It would reuse a brownfield previously developed area of land, and that would take pressure off developing greenfield sites. It's high density, which means that it's taking a very efficient and effective use of land. Also, the apartments themselves would actually use less resources for construction per dwelling, as opposed to, say, large detached properties on the edge of the town. Apartments also have a lower energy usage. So, for example, there is a trade-off in the heat that's provided throughout the building that means that the energy usage would be lower than that of, say, a detached property. The scheme would also include measures to reduce water consumption. And the scheme, as we've seen, would be a low car use scheme that would have a high level of cycle parking, and there would be easy access by walking and cycling and bus services with links across the UK available via the train station. Aside from being sustainable by design, the scheme also helps to try and address the issue of climate change. Although there are no requirements in our local plan to do this, they are proposing to provide high levels of insulation above building regulation requirements. They would provide low energy lighting throughout the apartments. They would use mechanical heat recovery systems to minimise energy use for heating and cooling. They would provide solar panels on the roof, and they would provide electric vehicle charging points for residents to use. Condition 13 therefore requires an energy statement to be submitted, which will require details of the measures to reduce carbon emissions to be submitted for our approval. Moving on to the economic benefits of the scheme, it's clear that this represents an opportunity for significant investment on the site. It would also result in construction jobs, and it would support jobs indirectly, for example, through the supply chain of construction materials. It would result in new household spending in the borough, and being very close to the town centre, that will lead to an increased viability of local shops and services. It will also increase the viability of public services. Now, in terms of the weight to give to that, regard has been had to the fact that this is a brownfield derelict site that's currently making no economic contribution. This development would be realised at a time of economic uncertainty, and it would also complete the cattle market redevelopment, which would lead to a positive uplift in the area. These are matters which therefore mean we feel the economic benefits should be given significant weight. There are a range of other matters to consider, and there are no detrimental impacts for all of these different issues, subject to things like conditions and legal agreements requiring financial contributions for mitigation. Before concluding, it's just worth looking and recapping at the potential of this site to regenerate the area. We've mentioned quite a few times that this is brownfield, previously developed land that's been derelict for 12 years. And what's key is that there have been permissions for various schemes on this site that haven't materialised. There's also been a development brief that's been prepared to try and attract investment, but ultimately that didn't bring any fruit. When looking at this scheme during the pre-application stage, we also had a number of alternative schemes submitted for consideration, but most of these were deemed to be of poor design or not appropriate uses for this location. This current scheme is a culmination of nearly 3 years worth of work to bring it to you today, and this represents now an excellent opportunity to bring this site back into active use. It would complete the regeneration of a key and prominent site by the train station, and that also helps to tie in to aid the regeneration plans for the town centre. The alternative option of refusal would lead to the stagnation of this site and no investment at a time of social and economic uncertainty. There would still be a need to redevelop the site for something, and that would hang over the area. And I think the refusal of the scheme would lead to further difficulty in trying to attract new investment for a viable scheme on the site. But most importantly, the benefits of approving this permission would not be realised if it were to be refused. Turning to the conclusion, the planning balance, we need to answer the question, is this sustainable development, by weighing up the benefits of the proposal against the harm. And to recap briefly, the economic benefits are all considered to be significant and weigh in favour of the scheme. The social benefits are also considered to be significant and weigh in favour of the scheme. In terms of the environmental impacts, there would be some harm caused by the loss of light and aspect to 6 habitable rooms, and that's considered to count with significant weight against the proposal. But the reuse of this contaminated brownfield site carries significant weight in favour. For other environmental issues, there would be a neutral impact subject to conditions. So on balance, it is felt that the many benefits of this scheme clearly and demonstrably outweigh the harm that's been identified. It's a significant opportunity to realise the potential of this site. Refusal would mean that the site remains derelict and those benefits aren't realised. The harm from those benefits not being realised are considered to be greater than the harm to the impact of light and aspect loss to the habitable rooms. And the question of, if this is not approved, what will be developed on the site would remain. there ultimately would have to be some form of development that would come forward, all of which would carry its own impact that would need to be mitigated. So in conclusion, we feel that this is a sustainable development. It's in accordance with the development plan, and the framework therefore says that we should be approving the scheme without delay. The recommendation is therefore one of approval, subject to conditions, a Section 106 legal agreement and informatives. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kingham. That was a very comprehensive report with a lot of visual detail. Councillor Butlin, can you turn your camera off, please? So the next stage of the process then is to ask the committee members whether they have any questions of clarification on the report that we've just heard. Okay, I've got Councillor New and then Councillor Garcia.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I lost signal for a little while there, but I've managed to get back. So if I go off, there's a reason with the connection. I just wanted to ask a question about the geocellular storage tanks. I don't know if the officer can explain what sort of geocellular storage tanks they are, whether they're the soak away or the ones that require regular maintenance.
So, Mr. Kingham, would you like to answer that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The tanks that will be proposed are essentially crates that are in the ground, and they would require maintenance in the future. That maintenance will be afforded by the condition that's on the agenda. So I'll just scroll to that now, if you just bear with me. So condition 6 of the agenda sets out that they would need to provide details of the maintenance of those surface water drainage treatments. And that would be both for the kind of initial implementation and the lifetime of the development. That's part G of condition 6.
Thank you for that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kingham. Councillor Garcia next, then Councillor Roodhouse, and then Councillor Srivastava, please.
Hi, thank you very much. I just wondered if you could just clarify the windows situation.
Mr. Kingham? Mr. Kingham?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think I've covered that in the presentation, but I'll just go back to that slide that shows
I suppose basically I wanted you to am I right in my understanding that none of those windows open?
Okay, sorry, I thought you meant the windows at Drover's house. Apologies. Yeah, so in terms of the windows in the proposed apartments, you would be able to open them, but that would expose residents to noise from things like traffic, the train line, and also existing businesses such as Stagecoach that operate in this area. So what we're saying is that the internal rooms would need to be cooled to an extent where it's comfortable for residents without needing to open those windows. And therefore, if you were to do that, it's an option available for residents. If they wanted fresh air, they could do that if they were happy with the noise that would expose them to. But it's essentially trying to remove the need for them to do that.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I just wanted to just make sure that they could all be opened if necessary. So that's great. Thank you.
Councillor Garcia, you might like to adjust your camera because all we can see is your neck and your chin. Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Roodhouse, you're next.
Thank you. Just a couple of points of clarification. Can I thank the officers for a very full and in-depth report. One is the sustainability travel pacts, which are on condition I think it's 27, isn't it? There, is there a price to those? Because I've noticed on other applications that have come in, it's like a recent one, it was £10 per pack per property, and there doesn't seem to be anything there. And can I thank the officers for taking on board also the ecology side of things and trying to get that within the local area. And I recognise that we can't put stringent conditions on that. And could he just confirm the County Council Highways view on cycleways that they're basically saying it's all right and everything will be fine on the day?
Okay, Mr. Kingham.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, in the first instance, on the cycle routes, yes, that is something that the county highways have looked at in a lot of detail and feel that it would be acceptable and appropriate using the existing national cycle routes. They've looked at the possibility of trying to create a new route or to improve those existing routes. But as I touched on in the presentation, there was issues with the basically the narrowness of the road and on-street parking provision. So that makes it very difficult to try and get something like cycle lanes in there. So they feel that, particularly given the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit on the existing roads, that residents would be more accepting of the ability to use the existing highway rather than have to have dedicated off-road facilities.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kingham. Councillor Srivastava, you are next, please.
Thank you very much, Catherine. It's a very comprehensive report. I would like to join other councillors to thank the officer. I've got two questions. First, on educational needs in the area, how this development is going to affect existing schools and what will the provision like. My second question on the traffic. Existing at the peak times, if you go near the railway station, when the traffic join on Murray Road towards Mill Road, is a chaos. Have the Warwickshire County Council authorities have made some assessment at the peak times? What will be the effect? And also the third one is going to be a lot of flats and people need some opening space, more opening space, especially the experience of COVID virus we can see. People with family living in flat need open space. So what are the provisions for these things? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kingham, would you like to address those 3 points, please?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of education, that's addressed at paragraphs 26.4 to 26.6 of the report. Basically, what it concludes is that there would be a need for contributions to, let me just scroll to the right place. So there would be a need to meet the early years care and special educational needs facilities, but there is enough sufficient existing provision for the other year groups, so that's both primary and secondary. So in relation to secondary, they've noted that there is an existing secondary school that's due to be opened at Holton, and that's opening a lot earlier than originally envisaged. And they're also investigating the possible expansion of Lawrence Sheriff School. So that means that they have concluded it would not be appropriate to expand other existing facilities elsewhere. So hopefully that's everything on the education side.
Can I just come in on this, on the education side? It's my understanding that these apartments, 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom, are not actually the target is not actually at young families. The target is at young professional people, am I right?
That's correct. So the applicant has obviously made a significant assessment of where it would be appropriate for them to provide this type of accommodation. And the proximity to Rugby train station in particular has led them to believe that they would be able to attract younger professional workers that are mobile that may even work in places like Coventry, Birmingham or London. And obviously, given Rugby's excellent rail links, it's actually very feasible for people to live in Rugby and work in places further afield. So they're kind of that's their target market. And interestingly, what they've said is that they have experience of this elsewhere at other development sites, primarily in cities elsewhere like Nottingham and Birmingham. And what they found is that you actually don't have young families in these apartments. It tends to be just single occupant or shared occupancy that's got no children, and therefore that does reduce the need for primary and secondary school provision arising from this development.
Okay, thank you. Right, the next question from Councillor was to do with traffic at peak times.
Yes, so the issue was raised particularly of Murray Road, and obviously we know by the railway station in particular, there's a lot of queuing around the bridge on Mill Road, and that obviously means that you have a lot of cars that are idling, and yeah, it is very congested around that area. So we did ask County specifically to look at this issue and say, well, what additional impact will this development have? And that's something that I touched on in the presentation. So just going to get the exact figures for you again. So yes, it was 81 two-way vehicle trips during the morning peak and 90 two-way vehicle trips in the evening peak. And then the key thing is that in terms of the distribution of those vehicles on the local road network, only about a third actually go on to the Murray Road area of town. And it equates to just one arrival trip on that route every 3 to 4 minutes at peak, and one departure trip every 4.5 to 6 minutes in the evening. And what they've said is that in the grand scheme of the existing issues in that area, that's not something that can be deemed significant or severe, which would require them to address that. I think it's also important to bear in mind that this is a scheme which has a lower level of parking and therefore a lower level of traffic movements associated with it. And that's something that needs to be factored in when considered. If this wasn't allowed, you would have to allow some form of development on the site at some point, which would have invariably vehicular movements coming to and from it. And looking at alternative schemes that have come forward that are proposing one parking space per dwelling, you could end up with an alternative scheme that has a greater impact than this one. So I think that's something to bear in mind. And then finally, the issue of open space for residents was raised. So I'm just going to share my screen again just to elaborate on that. Just bear with me a moment. So the screen that's hopefully now being shared with you all, or will do in just a second.
Yes, it's up.
Yeah, so this shows an area of open space for all residents. So it's a pocket park that would be provided. That's also a public park as well. So it would benefit all of the existing residents living in the area. So, for example, Farmers Court that doesn't currently have an area of open space. That's something that they could access, as could other residents in the surrounding area. And to enhance, although it's a relatively small area of the site, it would have a green gym on there, which obviously gives it that bit of a unique element as opposed to other open spaces in the area. And I think on that point, if we just navigate to, yes, this plan here is helpful. So you can see there, you've got another park in the locality. So that's the Millennium Playground. We've then got Winfield Park, you've got Borton Road Recreation Ground, and you've obviously got Caldicott Park and all of these parks are available within a short walk of the site. So that's one of the attractive things about this development, is that although it's a very urban area, there are actually some very well laid out award-winning parks that residents could access very easily. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kingham. Councillor, you need to adjust your camera because, again, we can only see the bottom part of your face. And you need now to switch your camera off. Thank you. Councillor Gillius, you're next.
Yes, Chairman, I do have a question for the officer, but first of all, I might have to point out to you that my laptop has decided it wants to go through a series of updates, so I'm now speaking on my mobile phone. The question is, and I'm going back to the first application that came in 10 or more years ago, it did talk about access through the site to the station. I didn't hear it being addressed in the presentation. Is that going to be the case that members of the public will be able to walk through the site to the station rather than go up the Murray Road and Railway Terrace?
Thank you. Mr. Kingham?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so there is an existing access across the site along Gavel Drive. So that's on the north-south axes, and obviously the road winds at 90-degree angles and ends up by the hotel car park. So that's by the Travelodge car park, and there's a link across from Craven Road to that location. That's proposed to be retained. And they're also proposing a footway that would run alongside the west of that existing road that would just help to make it that little bit more easy and safer for residents. But yeah, the permission that was referenced by the councillor initially had just a diagonal line going across the site with a park located either side of that. So that scheme is obviously not being brought forward for a variety of reasons, including the lack of viability of achieving that development, because it had very limited areas of supporting development to enable it. So we've looked at a variety of options and solutions for this scheme. So initially we did have a kind of more diagonal line with a small area of open space in the location of around Block B. But what you saw when I initially talked you through the constraints of the site is that the sewer system that runs across the land really restricts what can actually be taken, what can be put where, on the site. So the existing buildings really have to be in the location that they are there. And that does essentially mean that you can't achieve that direct route that was formally approved under that original permission.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask our legal advisor, could you advise Councillor Butlin, as Councillor Butlin came into the meeting late, please?
Thank you, Chair. As a general note, it's at the discretion of the Chair, but generally for regulatory committees, it's considered appropriate that if a councillor is not present for the whole of an item, they don't participate in the debate or vote on that item. So as Councillor Butlin wasn't present for the start of the presentation for the cattle market application, it would be advisable, Chair, for him not to participate in the debate and vote, although he is welcome to join in on the next application that is presented to committee.
Right, thank you very much for that. And I know that we do all get delayed on occasion, so hopefully he can join in on the next application. I take it there are no more raised hands, so we have obviously finished with our questions of clarification. So we're now going to move into debate, and I'd like to start by thanking the officer for such a very detailed report with an awful lot of visuals for us to be able to see, so that we actually understand the proposal before us. This has been a long time in the making. This is a derelict site. It's been derelict for over 12 years. I think the case for the development has well and truly been made, and so I'm very happy to move approval from the chair, and I'd like a seconder, please. Thank you. I've got some hands up. Councillor New, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a question, if I may. Not a question, make a point, sorry, before we...
We've moved from questions, we're into debate.
Into debate, sorry. Well, like you, I'm very pleased that the site's going to be developed. It's a long time in the coming, but however, I have got concerns that it's rather an over-intensive development, mainly because of the fact that the lack of car parking. I understand all the reasons behind it and all the plans, but I'm concerned about the fact that the GP surgery is often full. There's often a lot of cars parking on the surrounding streets, and I think this development is going to exacerbate an existing parking problem in the area. And we've also got point on page. Let me just check it on the notes, if I may. Page 21.14.15. Where highways remain concerned, residents may still have more cars than parking spaces. And it's a case that residents who have not been allocated a space would have to look for off-site options. And whereas I admit there is parking provision in the area in car parks, that is costly. So I just think that the parking is going to cause major problems in the area. And also, I know they say that these people aren't going to have many cars, but if people do have children and they have to travel to Holton, for instance, to get the secondary school provision, they're going to need a vehicle, because I don't believe that there is enough of a proper transport infrastructure to allow them to have proper bus routes to the site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Picker, you're next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chris, for the presentation, which I think was excellent this evening. I think it covered all the areas we need. I think overall this is a good application. I think it's one that we should be approving this evening. Just to directly come back on Councillor New's point, the application site is actually about 350 yards behind me as I speak. There is definitely an issue in this area with traffic, particularly on the Murray Road junction and at Mill Road. But I actually think limiting the available parking at this site will help that overall. I think if you have this as something that it is designed as it clearly is for commuters and for those you either living or working in the town centre or catching the train, that will minimise the need for additional car parking. So I think that actually, in my mind, is a point in favour of this, rather than, say, looking for something that would have more car parking spaces and thus lead to more cars on the road overall. I do have a couple of things that I wonder whether we can perhaps look at again in the conditions and informatives, specifically on condition 8. Which is over pages 38 and 39 of the report. The landscaping is listed. This is page 39, paragraph 2, sentence 2. If within a period of 5 years from the date of planting, the officer made note that the scheme is designed as a long-term scheme. So I wonder whether we might amend that condition to read if within a period of 10 years from the date of planting, if committee is amenable to that. And secondly, during the officer's report, you referenced the wish to try and have the 106 monies for biodiversity within the local area. That's something that I think we should absolutely look to do, because all too often these biodiversity funds get moved to existing areas outside of the town centre. So looking to legal, perhaps, is it possible to have an informative to that effect?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I don't have any problem with an informative being added to that effect. And if you'd like to, perhaps, depending on the motion that you pass, delegate authority to officers to draft an appropriate informative to reflect that.
Yes, I'm more than happy to move that and to move the amendment to condition 8, and subsequent to that, I'm happy to second approval.
Okay, and I'm quite happy to second the amendment suggested by Councillor Picker. Right, next up I have got Councillor Cranham.
Thank you, Chair. Well, the key points are This is a derelict site in desperate need of regeneration. It's also a constrained site, severely constrained, as we have seen in the presentation, the easements for the drains and the sewers, etc. And the question I ask myself is, has the applicant and his architect presented a scheme that addresses all those problems and comes up with a scheme that is acceptable to us? And I think he does, and I shall support approval. And I think the architect actually should pat himself on the back. He's done a very good job in a difficult, constrained site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Brown, you're next. Councillor Barbara Brown.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Chris as well for such a clear presentation. The area is certainly in need of regeneration. We need to be assured, though, I think, that issues like stress on school places, air quality, stress on medical provision and traffic flow is going to be frequently monitored for the impact that it's got on an already really high density ward, because there may need to be other strategies that need to be brought in to mitigate any problems that might be caused. I know we're talking in the abstract about things that haven't happened yet, but I'd like to know that we've got that assurance there will be perhaps more regular monitoring of those things than you would normally see in a ward that wasn't such high density.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. I don't know whether Mr. Holt would like to address this one as Head of Planning and Enforcement, as well as Mr. Kingham.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Through you. I think nowadays we are much more aware of matters to do with air quality and traffic and education need, and I think these things are now being much more closely monitored by members, but are also being brought up in separate sort of scrutiny panels and certainly questions fed to me, which I can then feed the officers. So I think with regard to Councillor Brown's comments, I think I could give her the assurance that these are things that we are now looking at more in a lot more detail, and particularly in light of the new adopted local plan. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And next I've got Councillor Gillius.
Yes, Chair. It's something I support really because of the need to develop that site. It's been to release the car park if non-residents park in it.
Okay, I think the answer was in the report, but I'm sure Mr. Kingham can go over that one again for us.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the car parks would actually have barriers going across the entrance and exit points. So access to those car parks would only be if you have a fob. And the only way of getting that fob is from the management of the apartments. As I noted, that there is a reception that would be on site in Block B, and they would be responsible for allocating parking spaces to only a limited number of residents, and there is also an opportunity for residents to get visitor passes, so a percentage of those car park spaces would be made available for people that may be travelling to visit them. So that really means that the opportunity for the public to use it is essentially restricted. And then we've also got a condition that requires a management plan for parking to be submitted to us, and as part of that what we're expecting to see is how exactly it would be managed and policed. So as well as the fobs to gain entry, residents will also need to display permits in their car. So we're obviously asking the question as to how then that would be policed by the investor on the site. And that detail would come to us for consideration in consultation with County Highways at a later date.
Okay, right, thank you for that detailed answer. Councillor Barbara Brown, you still have your hand up. Have you got another question? And so for Councillor Gillius, you still have your hand up, right?
No, sorry, I'm taking it down.
Okay, in that case, as there are no more hands in the air, we've had the application proposed by myself, seconded by the Vice Chair, subject to agreement to the amendments that the Vice Chair has proposed and I have seconded. So we will now move to the vote, and we will do that. All those in favour of this application, please raise your hand now. And can I ask Legal and Democratic to confirm the number of votes for, please?
10.
Okay. Hands down, everybody. And are there any against? Okay. Can we have confirmation of whether there are any against?
No hands raised.
Okay. Are there any abstentions?
1 abstention.
Thank you very much. In that case, I believe that the application is passed, and I think I'd like to thank all of the officers who've been involved in bringing this application to committee tonight, and I'd also like to thank all of the committee members for their patience and their diligence in going through the report and actually interrogating it before we came to a decision. Thank you very much. Right, we move on to the second application this evening, and that is R20/0094, and it's to do with the Rolls-Royce site at Coombe Fields and Kite Packaging. And the two officers involved are Mr. Kingham and Mr. Loud, but I believe Mr. Loud is going to do the presentation and give Mr. Kingham a bit of a rest.
Thank you, Chair.
Apologies,
Sarah,
Chair.
you have your hands up. Have I done something wrong?
No, I was just going to ask, we need to provide Councillor Butlin with the opportunity to make any declarations of interest prior to this application, as he missed that agenda item at the beginning of the meeting.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Butlin, have you got any items of declaration under non-pecuniary, pecuniary, or under Section 106 Local Government Finance Act?
None whatsoever.
Thank you very much, Councillor Butlin, and welcome to this application on which you will be able to ask questions, take part in the debate and the vote. Thank you. Right, over to you, Mr. Loud.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully you'll be able to see the presentation on the screen. This is an application at Rolls-Royce Anstey and seeks full planning permission for the erection of a new commercial headquarters for Kite Packaging. This consists of a variety of uses within it, including offices, research and development, light industry and general industry. The proposal will be accessed via Anstey Business Park, which is situated to the north of the application site. This is the location of the proposal. If you can see on the cursor, this is the Rolls-Royce site. To the north, you have Anstey Business Park. To the south, you have Coombe Abbey. And to the west, you have Coventry and the border of Coventry itself. This is the application site, and this is where the proposal, the bulk of the development will be situated over this existing car parking area here. A lot of the buildings towards the north have recently been demolished and a new building has been erected in its place, and that building and proposal is set out within paragraph 4.4 of the agenda and is currently occupied by Meggitt Aerospace. A number of the buildings towards the east has been retained, and to the south down here is Anstey Business Park itself. These are just a few photos taken from the Coombe Fields Road. The proposed building will be situated in this location here. You can just see where my cursor is here. This is the Meggitt building, and then you have Anstey Business Park located here. Again, this just shows the bottom two, particularly the Megget building here, and you can see the car parking area here, to which the building will be situated upon. And these are just, again, some more photos. This is Anstey Park and the NTC building on Anstey Park itself. So this is the proposal and the site layout. This is the building located here. This projecting element where my cursor is, this is the office element to the building. You have the proposed car parking area situated here. This area here will be the service yard, and then along the eastern boundary with Coomfields Road, you have an attenuation pond and then strategic landscaping. These are some elevations of the proposed building. The height of the building to the ridge will be 15 metres in height. This element here and here is the office element to the proposal. And these are just a few illustrative visualizations of the proposed building. This is an existing 3D view. This building here currently exists on the site at present. Obviously, a number of these buildings located towards like the northern end have been recently demolished, and this is where the proposed building will be situated. And this is just a 3D, a proposed illustrative visualization of the proposed building, and then this is the Megget building to the northern part of the site. Now this proposal shows the building which is here in the context of Cadent Gas. Now Cadent Gas was approved on the 27th of May this year and is currently subject to referral to the National Planning Casework Unit, as indeed this application will be if there's a recommendation for approval. That application relating to the Cadent building is set out within paragraph 4.1 of the agenda. This is the office building for the the office facility for the Cadent Gas, and this is the multi-storey car park which would serve the Cadent Gas facility. But the building in question, which is subject to the application which we're considering this evening, is this building here, which will be occupied by Kite Packaging. The key issues, firstly, is greenbelt. The site is located within the greenbelt, and therefore local plan policy does seek to resist development in the greenbelt unless national policy allows. With regards to national policy and what the national planning policy framework stipulates, is that new developments are generally regarded as inappropriate development. There are exceptions to this, one of which is redevelopment of previously developed land. It further states that inappropriate development is by definition harmful to the greenbelt and should not be approved except in special circumstances. Special circumstances will not exist unless harm is clearly outweighed by other considerations. With regards to assessing greenbelt and inappropriate development, and indeed the impact on the greenbelt, it is necessary to split the application site up into what we consider to be three distinct areas. So the first area, which is area 3, which you can see on the left bottom image, this is the existing highway infrastructure, and as such there's no change to this and therefore no impact upon the greenbelt. If you look at the right image here, you'll see zone 2. The western part of this area will remain unchanged, although the proposed Cadent Gas building would be situated in this location here. Along the southern part of this area, area 2, it will be used for the construction of the access and an element of the proposed car parking area. The more eastern part of this area will be used for the construction of the attenuation pond. Both the construction of the access, the car parking area, and the attenuation pond is considered inappropriate development. Moving on to area 1, this is where the proposed building will be sited, and the majority of the car parking area. This area is within the curtilage of the Rolls-Royce facility and therefore constitutes previously developed land. However, because of the scale and nature of what is being proposed, it is considered to still be regarded as inappropriate development and should only be approved if in exceptional circumstances. With regards to the impact upon the openness, it is considered by virtue of the footprint and volume of the building proposed that there will be a significant and permanent harm to the greenbelt by reducing openness. As you can see from the image on the left, whilst there is a car parking area within this location where the proposed building will be situated, it is nevertheless still open and free from built development, and therefore the impact upon the openness has to be considered as significant. With regards to other harm, it is judged that there will be further harm to 2 of the 5 purposes of including land to the greenbelt, albeit this harm will be limited. Those 2 purposes in which conflict does arise is with regards to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas and to assist in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. However, as already mentioned, this harm is considered to be limited. Moving on to the landscape and visual impact, the application site falls within part of the 75 hectares of the Rolls-Royce facility. The majority of the original buildings have now been demolished. These buildings were of a variety of buildings of different sizes, and the development is visible within the surrounding landscape, as we saw from the photos which I showed you earlier from Coomfields Road. You can clearly see within the application site. With regards to the proposal, as previously mentioned, the height of the building will be 15 metres and will be visible from Coomfields Road and from the east. However, in comparison to neighbouring buildings, for example, MTC, which is located on Anstey Business Park, which if you have a look at the image below, is the grey building to the far right where my cursor is. That's 19 metres in height, and the Meggitt building, which is in this location here to the left, is 13.70 metres. When you take into account the differences in levels, the ridge height of the proposed building will be 7.5 metres lower than MTC on the Anstey Business Park and 1 metre higher than the Meggitt building. As part of the determination of the application, the height of the building has been lowered by 2.5 metres with the removal of the rooftop plant room. Mitigation is also proposed through strategic landscape planting. With regards to the impact, as previously mentioned, the application site and the proposed building will be readily visible from the highway, footpaths and neighbouring dwellings. However, it will not be seen in isolation, but in the context of surrounding existing buildings, both Meggitt on the Rolls-Royce facility, but also buildings on Anstey Park. As also mentioned, the ridge height of this is lower than MTC to the north on Anstey Business Park. It will be set back from the Coomfields Road by 50 metres at the closest point to 98 metres at the furthest distance. Landscaping will assist in lessening the impact over time, and therefore it's considered that there will be no significant or detrimental impact on the landscape character. Now, Chris will now touch on the other points with regards to the principle of the development and other matters.
Thank you, Nathan. In terms of the principle of development, this is a existing strategically significant employment site. So that's covered by policy ED1 of the local plan. The site, sorry, I'm just getting a notification to request control of the screen. Just bear with me a moment, technical issue. Okay, I'm just going to just bear with me one moment. I'm going to load the presentation from a different computer so I can show you the impact on principle of employment. Just one moment. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that now. In terms of, I'll just recap from the beginning of this section, sorry. So we need to consider the principle of employment development on this site. And in that regard, this is an existing strategically significant employment site located within the Greenbelt. And that policy specifically indicates that there is a need to retain employment uses on this land. It would be a partial redevelopment of the Rolls-Royce site, and it would therefore comply with policy ED1. It's also necessary to have regard to policy DS1 of the local plan, and that sets out the need for employment land across the borough over the plan period. And it specifically indicates that there's a need to meet the employment need of the borough through intensifying the use of existing sites. So obviously this development is of a greater level of development than what was previously on the site, and therefore helps to meet the overall employment needs. It's also noteworthy that there is a historic precedent and legacy for employment development in this location. Indeed, there has been development on this area since 1935, when it was used as an airfield. It's been further redeveloped by Rolls-Royce since 1966, and its status as an employment site in the Greenbelt is therefore long established. The employment designation has been confirmed in successive local plans, which has set out that although it's in the Greenbelt, it's appropriate for employment uses to be brought forward on this part of the land. Those special circumstances have allowed for the development of Anstey Business Park, which has now largely been built out. And the status of this site is such that it is really critical to the economic and employment needs of this local and regional area. In terms of economic growth, the proposed occupier is a nationwide packaging company. It would be a base for up to 200 employees, and it would facilitate their day-to-day operations. They've indicated that there is a locational requirement for them to be located on this particular site, and that's because there is a cluster of high technology industries, manufacturing, research and development at Anstey Business Park. So this would lead to a new synergy and opportunities by virtue of co-location with those existing businesses. And the framework actually notes that there's a need to recognise that if there is such a locational requirement, that we should be trying to do everything we can to try and facilitate that, to allow the businesses to locate next to one another. There would also be direct benefits from allowing this development in respect of economic growth. This will again be a significant investment into the borough. It would safeguard existing jobs, and it would also provide opportunities for new employment. Further, it would add to the support of indirectly related jobs and businesses. So, for example, for the suppliers that Kite Packaging use, it would help to protect those jobs in the supply chain. One of the issues that we need to consider is the impact on traffic flows. And in that respect, the existing access onto the Rolls-Royce site was via Coomfield Road. So there was an existing access around this location here, and a further access down here. So that meant all of the traffic from this Rolls-Royce site had to funnel out onto Coomfields Road, which is the road located here. And that led to high levels of traffic through the surrounding villages as people had to navigate towards the major and strategic road networks when they'd left or were going to the site. But this proposal is actually to close the Rolls-Royce northern access. So that's the location that's in around this area here. And it would actually be accessed via a new road linking into the existing Anstey Business Park accesses. So basically the site would be located around here where the cursor is. And if you see there, that's the existing, a proposed road that would link from that development into the Anstey Business Park road that's already been constructed. And that allows direct access onto both the M6, the M69, and also the A46. There are a further secondary access point onto Coomfields Road at this. So a transport assessment has been submitted, which includes some modelling of trip generations and the distribution of all those traffic flows. That's been agreed with County Transport Planning and also Highways England. The micro-simulation modelling has been reviewed by the county and found to be acceptable. It indicates that 65% of traffic would leave the site through the primary access onto the A46, M6 and M69 links. A further 35% of the traffic would leave by the secondary access onto Coomfields Road. The conclusion is that there would be a negligible level of impact on the capacity of roads and junctions. Importantly, there would be less traffic accessing onto Coomfields Road and through the villages than was the case when Rolls-Royce were operating at full capacity from the site. Highways England, County Highways and Coventry City Council Highways all have no objection to the scheme. But to try and encourage a modal shift away from private cars, we are asking for a travel plan to be submitted, and that would be required by condition. The aim of that is to reduce the reliance on single occupancy cars and to encourage the use of sustainable transport. In terms of other matters that have been raised, there are issues around noise, but the office element of this is considered to be of low impact, and there would be limits on the plant noise and emissions for daytime and nighttime periods. This would ensure that the impact to the closest residential dwellings will be negligible, and environmental health are satisfied subject to conditions. In terms of lighting, the proposal has been designed in line with national lighting guidance and industry standards, and that includes having 0-degree tilt angled lighting, and it would also be controlled by photocell and time clocks. That would minimise light spill, glare and sky glow, and environmental health are therefore satisfied subject to a condition requiring approval of any changes to the lighting scheme that has already been submitted for approval. In terms of the climate emergency that's been declared by the council, the applicant is seeking to go above and beyond the local plan requirements and address this through some additional measures. So in the first instance, they would provide electric vehicle charging points, but they would also provide 500 square metres of solar PV panels on the roof of the building. You can see there one of the pictures that illustrates that on the screen. This is the Megit building, which you'll recall was just to the west of this proposed development and has only recently been constructed. So they did a similar thing, and that's looking to continue through the development. There's also conditions requiring a travel plan to try and encourage the shift away from private cars, as we just touched on. And there's also condition 19, which requires the developer to comply with BREEAM Very Good sustainability ratings. That essentially looks at the construction of the building and its operation and ensures that it minimises its reliance on resources and reduction in carbon emissions. The proposal will also provide strategic landscape planting and off-site biodiversity offsetting. It would also be better than air quality neutral when you take into account the previous use of the site by Rolls-Royce. There would be no detrimental impacts for the range of issues that are covered in the report and highlighted on the screen before you. The question is therefore, does this development constitute sustainable development? And in that regard, it's firstly necessary to have regard to the inappropriate nature of this development in the Greenbelt that should not be approved except in very special circumstances. Very special circumstances will not exist unless all of the harm to the Greenbelt is outweighed by other considerations. We've identified, as Nathan touched on earlier, that the harm to the Greenbelt is very much by reason of inappropriateness, the impact on openness, and the impact on two purposes of including land in the Greenbelt. That all carries substantial weight against the development. But in favour of the development, there's the economic side, where this represents investment and redevelopment and intensification on a historic employment site. It will also lead to the protection of existing jobs and opportunities for new jobs, and the locational requirement for the proposed occupier to be in this location next to the existing research and development facilities and manufacturing facilities also weighs in favour of them being located here. And that's all matters which carry very substantial weight in favour of the proposal. In regard to social considerations, it would re-establish employment opportunities at the Rolls-Royce site. Obviously, as the existing buildings have been demolished, the number of employment opportunities at this existing Rolls-Royce site have declined, and therefore this is a chance to bring some new jobs and revitalise this site. It would also help to safeguard existing jobs, and it would create opportunities for new ones. And it's considered critical, given the current economic and social uncertainty, to try and give some reassurance to the occupier and also other occupiers that are interested in co-locating at this particular site. The safeguarding of those jobs would actually help to improve and safeguard mental health and well-being. And it's also noted that there would be access to jobs to the Coventry urban area. That's something that's essential to creating sustainable communities, because essentially the constrained nature of Coventry with the issue of greenbelt surrounding it means that there's a need to deliver and meet their employment needs on sites that are within our borough on the edge of that urban area. So all these matters carry very substantial weight in favour of the proposal. In terms of environmental impacts, there would be no adverse impacts, or mitigation to offset potential adverse impacts would be secured by conditions. It's noted that there would be some benefit through the provision of solar panels. So in conclusion, it's considered that the benefits of the proposal outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt. Very special circumstances exist to justify development here. It therefore complies with the development plan, and there are no material considerations which indicate development should be refused. Given that it's therefore deemed to be sustainable development, it should be approved, subject to conditions, informatives, and referral to the Secretary of State. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Thank you very much. to Mr. King, Mr. Loud. Very comprehensive report again, lots of good visuals, and I think some of the queries that committee members had have probably been addressed in that presentation. But does anybody have any questions of clarification? Councillor Gillius.
Yes, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, thanks. First of all, a couple of points of clarification. The first of which is condition 16 linked with informative 2, and that does refer to the northern access of Coomfields Road.
What's your question, Councillor?
Does that refer to the northern access of Coomfields Road? Because it isn't actually mentioned in the informative.
Okay, can one of our officers answer that, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've just looked at condition 16 and it does specify there that it relates to the existing northern Rolls-Royce access that would be closed.
Okay,
Thanks for that.
That answers the
point
question.
to mention, and that is on 15.2 of the report. It does actually mention about historic traffic movements through Anstey. As we know that very little traffic used to go through Anstey in that direction. Most of it went along Coomfields Road, Peter Hall Lane and Smeaton Lane, and out through all the villages that way, and bring close Stretton and the Foss, Pailton, to access areas out towards Lutterworth. So there is, you know, according to the traffic modelling, we've got 35% of the traffic flow could be along those roads. And how are we going to mitigate that issue? Because it quite well could be that the modelling is incorrect, and most of the people that work there could be going in that direction and not in the other direction.
Okay, so who's going to answer that one for us, please?
Yes, through you, Chair. The modelling has been agreed with Warwickshire County Council, and it has obviously been through rigorous assessment and examination by Warwickshire County Council Highways, and they are satisfied with the modelling that has been provided, together with the impacts and also the traffic flows which have been stipulated within that transport assessment and modelling, and they're happy that the proposal will not have a detrimental impact upon the surrounding highway network. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Gillies?
Yeah,
Okay.
I've still got one or two other questions to go.
Keep going then.
Yeah, now, I'm assuming this is going to be a 24-hour operation. So the question is referring to condition 3, informative 1, about restriction of times and traffic movements to and from the site. There's no conditions relating to evening movements of traffic. And it's quite obvious that if 35% of the workers are going to go in that way, then delivery vehicles and all the rest will go along that way as well. And remember, it's only a country lane along Peter Hall Lane and Smeaton Lane, so it can be a little bit of a racetrack there at the start of the working day and at the end of the working day. So how are we going to sort that one?
Okay, who's going to answer that one?
Yeah, I'll take this one, Chair. It's basically the condition 3 that's been referred to specifically relates to construction. So it's a construction management plan that would need to be submitted that would detail when things like HGVs could come to and from the site. But in terms of once the site has been developed and is occupied, we've got conditions 23 and 24 of the report. That suggests that they would need to keep noise levels below specified limits. So it's looking at this, it's 41.5 decibels in the nighttime hours. So they would have to ensure that their operations didn't exceed that limit through the nighttime hours that the council is concerned about.
Okay, so that we won't get any traffic movements through those villages during the middle of the night?
Not according to those conditions, Councillor Gillies, if I've read them correctly.
The other point to include in the report is that when Rolls-Royce was fully employed, most of the workers went there by coach and not car.
Okay.
Thank you.
Where does that fit with the travel plan then, Mr. Kingham?
So the transport modelling that's being carried out has obviously looked at the overall number of vehicular movements that could come to and from the site, the original Rolls-Royce site, as was originally built out. I know that there has been previously the use of coaches and such like, but in terms of the modelling, it has to look at with X amount of square metres of B2 floor space, what would the potential vehicular movements to and from the site be? And then it compares that to the amount generated by this use. I think the key thing to note is that previously all vehicles, 100% of the traffic, had to leave via Coomfields Road. And the report notes that that traffic was dispersed on the local area, including through the villages that the councillors mentioned. The improvement here is, I think it's important not to underestimate that as an improvement, that 65% of vehicular movements would actually now be deferred towards the Coventry corridors, the M6, M69, A46. And I think in this case as well, it's necessary to note that Kite Packaging are currently based in Coventry. So all of the existing employees are obviously more likely to be located around that area, which leads to a natural pull towards the Coventry corridor, as opposed to into the rural road network outside of the site to the east. So hopefully that helps to address some of those concerns.
Thank you. Councillor New is being very patient, but I noticed that Mr. Holt would like to say something at this point, so I assume it's on a planning issue.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was just to clarify, the conditions 23 and 24 obviously relating to vehicle movements and activities around the building itself. What we wouldn't be able to do is to actually restrict vehicle movement outside the actual application site. The only way you could do that is through traffic regulation orders, and obviously that is a separate matter that's outside planning legislation. So I just want to make sure members fully understood that.
Thank you for the clarification. Councillor New, very patient.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions, if I may. I'm concerned about the, if I can draw your attention to paragraph 14.7 on page 63. It mentions there that there's likely to be a potential impact on bats, reptiles, great crested newts and birds. And they're saying that they're looking at mitigate. I looked at condition 9, which is the ecological management plan. They don't mention anything about newt surveys or anything like that. Is there likely to be anything like that happening to check what's on the site before the development goes ahead?
Okay, thank you for that. Which of the officers is going to answer that one?
I can. I'm just looking at the conditions myself. That will fall within condition 3. So if you have a look at condition 3 and at bullet point J, that includes pre-commencement checks for wildlife.
Wonderful. So they will be doing a newt survey.
They will be, yeah. There'll certainly be pre-commencement checks, and obviously condition K also relates to that as well.
I've also got another question. Thank you for that, Nathan. I've also got another question, Chair, if I may. The concerns about the runoff from the site. Does anyone know, and the risk to the 3SI site at Coombe Pools? I'm just wondering what is the likelihood, what is likely to be in the runoff from the site that is causing the concerns? Does anyone know what might be likely to be running off?
Okay, have we got an answer for that one? I think they're checking the conditions.
Yeah, so the surface water runoff is obviously just going to be from the current situation where it's a car park, it won't be actually that dissimilar, because it's just rainwater goods that will channel that existing water flow to the roof to the sustainable attenuation ponds. So it's just surface water, but it's just ensuring that it's kind of managed in a way that ensures that it's clean and free of any pollutants. There's no specific contamination issues that this use would give rise to warrant any cause of concern. That certainly hadn't been picked up in the contamination statements that have been submitted with the application. But it's essentially like a safeguard to ensure that anything that did fall foul into the water would be addressed before it then got to the natural systems further downstream.
Okay, how would they manage to address that if there was a flood on the site, for instance? How would they be able to contain it?
So the surface water drainage would be channeled into an attenuation pond that was shown on the layout scheme. So that means that the attenuation pond is designed to deal with surface water runoff from this development, and make an allowance for climate change is incorporated into that discharge runoff mechanism. So it's contained on site. Hopefully that's potentially clear.
Thank you. And just one last question, Chair, if I may, regarding the biodiversity offsetting, because there's going to be quite a loss of biodiversity on the site. Do we know where the biodiversity offsetting is likely to be placed? Anywhere where it's going to go? Do we have any details on that yet, or?
Through you, Chair, obviously a lot of the details are subject to conditions, although it is the intention that towards the outside of the red edge and the wider Rolls-Royce site, there are areas to accommodate this offsetting adequately on site.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. It says thank you to the office as well. Thank you.
Right, there seem to be no more questions of clarification, so we will move into debate. Okay, who'd like to start on this one? I've got a hand in the air. Councillor Cranham, I think you were first.
I would hope so, Chair. Without more ado, this should be approved, and I move approval for the reasons set out in the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You will need a seconder. So I've got Councillor Butlin, your hand's in the air as well.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would like to second that for various reasons. I think as far as the green belt is concerned, it's more of an anomaly rather than a reason for refusal. It just so happens that an old industrial site is in the green belt, so I don't consider that to be a restriction at all. And I welcome the jobs into the area. Especially we're now in an area where there's a shortage of employment land.
Thank you very much. Right, next up is Councillor Kieran Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in regards to this, I have no objection. You know, it clearly promotes economic development, and I'm happy to support.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gillius.
Yes, Chair. Obviously, this is a really historic employment site. And it gets my support. The only thing I am concerned with, and I'm hoping the rest of the council will support me on this, is that if the products to this factory that are being manufactured are leaving site by HGV, and they'll obviously be moving on the big roads and the main arteries, but if these products have been delivered by small and medium vans, they're likely to go through the quickest route, which is be through the little villages. And in this day and age with fantastic technology, and virtually every owner of a vehicle has got a tracking device on, so they know where that vehicle is every minute of the day. It wouldn't be a bad idea if after the first 12 months of the operation of this site, we could have a bit of a readout and find out whether these vehicles are actually going through the small villages. It's not rocket science. It'd be done very easily with an informative.
Right, okay. Can I have some advice on that, please?
I'm happy to pitch in through you, Chair. I can understand Councillor Gilias's concern, and small villages and the impact of traffic can be pretty detrimental. So I don't think there's any problem with putting an informative in if we delegate to officers to draft something appropriate in conjunction with highways to review the impact of the development within 12 months and provide information to the highways so that they can take any measures they feel necessary if there is a detrimental impact.
Okay. Councillor Gillies, does that
most welcome.
your concern? Okay, thank you. Councillor Cranham, your hand is still up. Have you got another question? No. Councillor Picker?
Certainly not, Chair.
Right, Councillor Picker, your hand is raised.
Only to say that I'm happy to second the informative of Councillor Gillies.
Okay, thank you very much. Wonderful. In that case, there are no more hands in the air, so we will move to a vote. It has been proposed by Councillor Cranham, seconded by Councillor Butlin, with an informative proposed by Councillor Gillies, seconded by Councillor Picker. Councillor New, have you got a problem? Or are you voting?
Sorry,
Right.
Chair. So I was just voting. Sorry.
All right, I haven't got that far. Right, all those in favour, raise your hands now.
I make that 12, so that's unanimous.
Okay, did I raise mine? I did, right, okay. So if that was unanimous, there are obviously no against and no abstentions. That means that that application has been passed. Can everybody remember to lower their hands, please, now? Okay, we move on now to agenda item number 5, which concerns the public report of the Executive Director on the diversion of part of footpath R167 at Corston. Who is going to speak on this one, please?
I can do. It's Richard Holt speaking. With regard to the footpath order, this has come to committee primarily because there was an objection that was received. As members may note from one of the plans, it does show that the footpath needs to be diverted because of a development by Bellway Homes that received planning permission. The objector has actually now removed their concerns after meeting with the developer and officers from the council, because they were primarily concerned about merits of the planning application rather than the actual diversion order. So therefore there are no concerns, and we obviously recommend that the order is confirmed as diverted is shown on the path.
Thank you. Do I need a proposer and a seconder for that legal, or can I just go for a show of hands?
Could we have a proposer and seconder, please?
Okay, I'll propose that. Councillor Butlin, your hand was first up.
It's on my, thank you, Chair. It's on my patch, so I'll second it.
Okay. In that case, has anybody got any queries before we move to a vote? No. In that case, all those in favour of confirming the order, raise your hands now.
That is unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Remember to lower your hands, everybody. And we move on to agenda item 6, which is advance notice of site visits for planning applications. I understand no advance notice for site visits has been received. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In which case we move on to agenda item 7, which is urgent decisions under emergency powers for April and May 2020. I'm going to ask our legal advisor to actually explain emergency powers and urgent decisions and what happened. But I would ask that we have a correction of my name to Councillor Miss Lawrence rather than Councillor Mrs Lawrence, who's no longer with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We will note that correction. The report details a number of decisions that were taken during April and May under the urgency powers that are set out in our council's constitution. Under the constitution, there are powers for the executive director to make decisions that would ordinarily be made by a regulatory committee, such as planning committee. There are requirements for those decisions to be consulted with the chair of planning committee, along with the leaders of the Labour group and the Liberal Democrat group. The decisions set out in the report are those that have been taken under those urgency powers over the last couple of months. The reason we use the urgency powers was to enable the planning system to continue to operate in line with government guidance and advice, whilst we liaised internally about setting up virtual planning meetings. So it was to cover that gap between when lockdown started and we weren't able to hold planning committee, between then and this meeting, which is our first virtual planning committee meeting. Now, those decisions under the Constitution have been taken and are reported to planning committee in line with the requirements of the Constitution for you to note, but they are decisions that have been taken and are not to be undone by planning committee. Obviously, if you have any particular questions about any of the decisions in that paper and you would like to discuss those with either myself or Richard after the meeting, then please do get in touch with us.
Okay. Thank you. All right. And so we move on from there to agenda item 8, which is planning appeals update. Mr. Holt, would you like to take us through the planning appeals update, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. Through you, obviously, Appendix A is as written, as it details those appeals which we've had decisions on. In Appendix B, it lists 4 appeals that were outstanding and in progress as of the 31st of March. We have actually had decisions on all 4. The first one in at 35 Cedar Avenue in Brighton on Dunsmore was allowed. The advertisement board at Newbold Road was dismissed. The certificate of lawfulness application at Fossway, Monks Kirby was allowed, and the Brambles at Frankton was dismissed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much on that one. Okay, so we move on to agenda item 9, which is delegated decisions from the 13th of March to the 12th of June 2020. Mr. Holt, do you wish to say anything on those?
No, just for members to note.
Okay, so everybody has noted. Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to ask IT to stop streaming, and can I thank the public for their attention.